Okay, hello there YouTube and my class as well. Today I am doing a video on the connections between Lord of the Rings and World of Warcraft. First off, direct references. I would like to make a concession real quick. I am aware many different resources, both fantasy stories were influenced by. I am merely examining the text on how they changed the landscape of the genre and inevitably altered the approach of one another. So basically, I know they pulled from a bunch of different mythologies and other various sources, however, they both changed the genre so much that there is no doubt in my mind that they influenced each other. First off, the Eye of Ogres and the Eye of Sauron. They're both known as all-seeing eyes and are used to spy on the forces of good, basically. The Eye of Arcaris, of course, belongs to the Lich King, and the Eye of Sauron is kind of obvious. It has his name in it. Alright, second off, Easter egg with trolls from the Hobbit. Now, these are actually Gron or Gronlings, but they resemble trolls in Lord of the Rings more. This is in Draenor, and it is a direct reference not only because of the fire pit, but also because of the loot that you get from that chest you can see in the picture. You get, I believe, dwarf clothing and some rings. Alright, so I know these guys don't necessarily look like Gimli and Legolas, but they definitely are a reference. Why they didn't just make Tarnar a archer, I'm not sure, and why they didn't give Goodwin an axe, again, not sure, but they do have a contest to see who kills the most, much like Legolas and Gimli. I won't read this all for you, but pretty much there's their conversation. And unlike in Lord of the Rings, where Gimli wins, they made the elf win by one. This one's a pretty obvious giveaway. The One Ring. I wish I could add a drum roll for their very cringeworthy, yet funny joke there at the bottom. Not quite as good as the Two Ring. Alright, indirect reference. So, both dwarves, treasure seekers, they're stout, they're brave, they're stubborn. Lord of the Rings dwarves, created by Mahal, probably mispronouncing that. One of the most interesting things I found was this right here. They are referred to as Khazad in their own tongue. They're blacksmiths and stoneworkers, and they're 7 tribes. Now, if you look at the WoW ones, they inhabit Cosmodan. I don't know if there's a Latin root to that, or if it is just directly a reference. I could not find it. I did try. And also, something very different that sets the WoW dwarves apart is the Curse of the Flesh. They used to be made of stone. Although, I do believe that Mahal was a blacksmith and stoneworker, so they're still basically connected. Okay, goblins. This is interesting because they're both small creatures. They're both green. They more or less they both have elf ears at least, and I mean they're all pretty much greedy. But in Lord of the Rings, goblins seem to be interchangeable with orc, except that they're small. But they did kind of, in the movies, make them a separate creature. They're a lot smaller. And so I believe that was a conscious choice, but I'm not sure why they didn't just make them all orcs to connect them. Another interesting thing, though, the goblins are actually the ones that chase after the Bilbo and his party after they killed his king, but in the movie they made it orcs and it's not connected to the killing of the Goblin King. But that character, Azog, is normally a goblin and he's his son. He definitely isn't that, and I'm not sure why they changed that in the movies, but there that is. Okay, orcs. Big difference I gotta point out right now is orcs in WoW are good, more or less. They are not the inherent evil that they are in Lord of the Rings. However, they both have been controlled by a dark force. The orcs in WoW were controlled by the Burning Legion, which is basically a bunch of demons, and obviously the orcs in Lord of the Rings are controlled by Sauron and or the Witch King. They are both separated into clans to some extent, depending on how much you rely on the sources that have continued on since the movies and books for Lord of the Rings. They are also have kind of little disputes between the clans, and there are different war chiefs. Same with WoW, there are different war chiefs. There's different hordes of orcs. Some of the orcs are still evil. Some of them still worship some demons, blah blah blah. But the main orcs used to be controlled and are now good. Okay, so WoW trolls, they are nothing like the Lord of the Rings trolls. They are tribal and intelligent and shamanistic, all kinds of things. They're fun, but they're not like Lord of the Rings trolls. However, Grons and or Gronlings, since they are smaller, are a lot more similar to the trolls, especially the cave trolls in Lord of the Rings. As you can see, they're both brutes. They are just very savage things. The main difference here is actually that the Grons, even though they are not intelligent, just like the cave trolls, actually ruled over ogres in the past, and there's been a lot of disputes between them and the orcs, whereas the Lord of the Rings takes the trolls and pretty much puts them in control of Sauron and in turn the orcs. Alright, elves. Gets a little bit complicated. Again, can't go over everything, but the elves in Lord of the Rings, they're the first race, probably, the children of Iluvatar, nearly immortal, tall, beautiful, and magical, all that good stuff, live in the woods. There's different groups of them, blah blah blah. Again, wow, they're ancient, tall, beautiful, magical. There are several subgroups, not all of them shown here, but they all derive from the Highborn, which basically looks like that blood elf up in the right hand corner there with the green eyes, except they have blue eyes. The elves at the bottom there are night elves, and they are druids and other various things like that, and they protect nature pretty much. Now, I know what you're thinking with elves and then this next one. Well, not this next one. I lied. Elves and dwarves, they're in all kinds of fantasy things, yes, but the way that they did it, and especially the way that the game affects the movies, they made them a lot nicer and more likable. And I'll get into that later. Okay, this guy right here, the Witch King. Chief of the Nazgul, wraith nearly indestructible. Oh, look, the Lich King. And Master of the Scourge, human possessed by undead sorcerer, nearly indestructible. Alright, so they're both basically these twisted human forms that serve a higher master and lead forces against the forces of good. Yeah, and they both have nifty helmets. Alright, stone/mountain giants created by the Titans in WoW, guardians of nature. Stone giants in Lord of the Rings seem to be very mysterious. They mostly inhabit mountains. We see them in The Hobbit throwing stones at each other just for fun. They're very territorial, so they will throw stones at you as well. But their origin seems to be mysterious. A lot of people seem to think that They were created as some kind of twisted version of Ents, but again, mysterious origin, nothing's... Okay, Ogres. This was interesting. I did not know this until I researched. So, no matter what, Ogres are monstrous and destructive creatures, but it is disputed whether or not they existed in Tolkien's books, or if they were just myths. They are mentioned, but they are never actually physically in it. Most, however, do believe, amongst other creatures they were used in the movies, to create more variety during battle scenes. If you look up ogres in Lord of the Rings movies, you will find a picture of that guy down there at the bottom. Obviously, other than the small tusks and the horn on their head, they do resemble, in many ways, the ogres from WoW. Alright, wolves and wargs. So basically, in Lord of the Rings, wargs are demonic wolves. A little bit different. They're more intelligent. In the books, a lot of these races, there's a lot of talking animal races. So that's a thing, but obviously taken out of movies for pretty good reasons. They are often ridden by orcs. Same thing with the wolves, except they're just wild, big, intelligent wolves, but are also ridden by orcs. I don't know if that's in the original lore for orcs, but again, these two were just genre changing, and I believe that a lot of this is directly connected in one way or another, even if they weren't directly paying homage or copying each other. They changed the landscape and therefore changed each other. Alright, so basically ancients, the top here, this top left and top right, and treants, little guy right there, and ents. Okay, so basically they were created by more or less some kind of form of Mother Nature. Doesn't matter what each series calls them, they were created by Mother Nature. They are very slow but intelligent protectors of nature. The ancients are aligned with the Night Elves. The Ents tend to stay by themselves, however, they do inhabit some of the woods where elves live, and they are quite fond of them. Now, actually, interesting thing, tree. Alright, so influences on the films. Alright, so if you look at Smaug in the books, we are with Bilbo the whole time. We do not see Smaug's attack on the town. But if you look at Deathwing's attack on, say, Stormwind in WoW, there's an uncanny resemblance, and I think that that's just pulling from as many sources as you can, also just intuition on what a dragon-like attack would look like, but I do believe there is a connection, considering how popular the series is. If you're trying to look at sources for how are we going to make this dragon attack look, WoW is one of the places you would look. Alright, so Azog, for one thing, like I said, he was referred to as a goblin. He's son of the Goblin King. He is still called the White Goblin, blah, blah, blah. For one thing, he's not in the Hobbit. He's mentioned, but he's not really powerfully in it. He's not chasing them the whole time. Doesn't lose his hand, but look at this guy right here, Kargath Bladefist. Again, World of Warcraft influencing. They thought, hey, a white orc, and he has a blade hand. That's cool, let's do that. The end on... Alright, Dwarves and Mounts. Dwarves are very opposed to mounts in the books, mostly because they're too big and they scare them. Poor Gimli gets put on horses with other people because he can't ride on his own throughout the Lord of the Rings series. In the Hobbit movies, we see them riding on rams. There's also their cousin that comes to save the day is riding on a pig, I believe. That's not a thing, but it is in WoW. Ram mounts seem fitting. I agree. They're dwellers of mountains. So there you go. And look at the armor, even. They have pretty much the same type of armor. It's a little bit more realistic in the movies, obviously, but yeah, pretty much the same. Alright, worms. So, these things are technically mentioned. I looked it up. Barely mentioned, though. They are definitely not in the fight in the Hobbit. You can barely see that guy down there. He is in the center, a little bit to the left, shooting out of the mountain. Let all the orcs go through the mountains. They're kind of a mix between these little guys on the left, made out of stone, and the guys on the right, which are actual worms. You can see he kind of has the round mouth, but then obviously he is made out of flesh, not out of stone. Now, yes, there are probably other sources, such as even things like Tremors, which I hope didn't influence too much of these movies. But, once again, this is the main landscape for fantasy genre right now, and I do believe that they pulled from sources. Alright, so that about wraps it up. This is my works cited. I just went to things like Tolkien Gateway, the actual books, the actual game, and then the Wikia for other possible sources that I mentioned earlier. There's numerous mythos that they both drew from, including Norse, Anglo-Saxon, and Celtic. Various religions, especially with Lord of the Rings, obviously they drew from Christianity. Numerous grimoires. Those have obviously been written for centuries just about various creatures. Now, interesting thing about Lord of the Rings, there is a debate over whether I don't even know how to pronounce that, the Nibelung, I believe it's Germanic, ring, if he was influenced by this story, and if his involvement in World War I influenced Lord of the Rings, and subsequently the fantasy genre as a whole. Debatable. Very debatable. He said no, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it subconsciously. So that about wraps it up. Thank you for watching. Bye.